half of the plays that get into production in the States are written by women. And that obviously wasn't just me, that wasn't just the study, it was a lot of traction and discussion and emphasis after that. But I think this idea that like we can use data to understand why people are making the decisions they're making, call out when those decisions can be made better, and then society wants super efficient markets. So it creates change. So that's that same sort of motivation that led me to Coursera. So I don't know, any startup founders have like 40 employees? Ish, yeah. Okay, so that was Coursera when I joined, and it wasn't really a business at the time. It's a .org and a social mission, and it really had this sort of potential to expand access to education. And I was a labor economist by training, so expanding access to education is like also expanding access to labor market opportunities. Long story short, I ended up joining as their first data scientist. It's a long story, literally, because I was rejected multiple times, but eventually convinced Andrew and Daphne to let me join. I built and led the data org there, so machine learning, data engineering, and data science. And then about 3 years ago, I moved to Stripe.
Great. Well, I mean, we should cover a bit about your time at Coursera during this as well, because there are obviously a bunch of earlier stage companies here who I think could learn a lot from that experience. But kind of talking more broadly to Stripe today, would love to kind of understand a bit better how like the data teams work within Stripe and particularly how they interact with business users and what's centralized and what's decentralized and how you think about kind of making data most useful and usable in the organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's like a living, breathing, evolving thing. Like there's no perfect data org structure, and it very much changes as the company evolves and the people in the company evolve. But I would say, so broadly speaking, I lead the information org. We work across 2 domains. First domain is let's make data useful. And that's really like whatever it takes. So ML infrastructure, data engineering, analytics, science, and then a new applied ML bets, which is about, hey, let's make sure we get Gen AI into production in ways that might be hard to do within individual vertical teams that are today tasked with like a lot of operational overhead. That's thing 1. And then thing 2 is let's help grow the self-serve business. So there's a lot of millions of startups and SMBs that come to Stripe, understanding who those users are, making sure you all have a seamless onboarding experience, that you're landed in the right suite of products, that your integration is optimal, and then as you grow your business, that you have access to the tools you need to continue to scale, whether that's tax or invoicing or subscriptions or revenue recognition or whatever. So those are kind of two different hats. The data hat for us is really interesting in terms of organization. So people always ask me, like, how do you structure science to have the most impact? Like, should it be fully part of the vertical team? Should it be embedded in those teams? Should it be wholly central? And I think you actually can have your cake and eat it too once you're a certain size. So Stripe, for context, our data science team is 160 folks, and we have a hybrid sort of centralized embedded model. So what that means in the centralized way, we all report up centrally, so all the scientists and analysts report in centrally. That provides a consistent hiring bar and talent development, but it also allows us to prioritize the right shared foundations. So whether that's saying, hey, we need to standardize some additional core tables and build them directly, or hey, we really need to upgrade our notebooking infrastructure, and we take that as one cohesive ask to our core data platform team. And so you get a lot of value out of centralization. You also get standardized metrics and dimensions so that everyone's speaking the same language, whether they're in product or go-to-market, whether they're working on product A or B or C or D. And I think there's a lot of value there. Now, the risk of centralized is you're too far removed from the product and business, that you don't understand the core user needs, whether those are internal stakeholders or your ultimate end users. And that's why we also have the embedded model. So every one of our scientists and analysts has a team they're embedded in. They have 2 first teams. They have the data science first team, and they have the billing team or the sales team or the marketing team or the finance team or the core payments team. And they actually, just like the design team, which follows the same model, centralized, embedded, see both as their first teams. And so they work in groups with engineers and a PM and a designer and a data scientist. And it's not just the ICs who are embedded. So think about like the manager of manager levels, like data science leaders. Those folks are also embedded. So they sit on the staff of the business lead for billing if their team is working on billing. And they're really tasked with solving the needs of the users jointly with whatever their primary business stakeholder is.
And I guess that helps because then everyone can bring back whatever information they can have, and it makes the whole centralized team better as well.
Yeah, I mean, our tech reviews are my favorite meeting of the week. Yeah.
And I guess if you were operating at a smaller scale, if you were starting with one data person in the organization, or a team of like 3 or 4 practitioners, like how would you think about it then?
Yeah, so that was Coursera, and we started centralized. So stepping back, if you have a very small data team, I think there's like 3 things to keep top of mind. One is enable as much self-serve as you can, and I'll share some specific ways how. The second is choose your spots. So don't try to be all things to all people. Decide where your data scientist is going to play. And then 3, like where you see value, higher up, right? Like grow your science team. On enabling self-serve, I think there's a bunch of different components to this, but it all starts with having clean, easily accessible, standardized data. So like build those core tables, whether they're about users or revenue or product usage or marketing source, like what they are for your business, but define and build those core tables, and make sure you have standardized dimensions so that those tables talk to each other and everyone's speaking the same language. And by the way, it doesn't have to be your data scientist building it. It could be a back-end engineer who happens to be very interested in data. It could be a data infrastructure person who happens to want to be closer to the product and business and get exposure to that data, right? They're pipelining, they're building their core tables. Second is make sure you have the self-serve analytical tools. So whether that's an easy query engine or access in Tableau so that folks can access the data in a self-serve way. And then third is training and enablement. And it's not the job of just the data scientist to train and enable. I remember at Coursera when I joined, there were 2 guys, they're still good friends of mine, Andy and Thomas. They're back-end engineers who happen to know a lot about our product and love data. And they were more active in our sort of data office hours, data Slack channels than I was or than the other scientists. So really enable and make sure folks can self-serve on the data. You can build standardized dashboards, but I think ultimately they need to be able to access their raw data, query it, and be able to drive the insights they need themselves, which then gives you space to choose your spots. So maybe you really want to work on, I don't know, user acquisition or pricing, or you think there's a lot of value in building a net new data product. But like you can't do all 3 of those things at the same time well. And so decide which one you're going to focus on. You may do them all eventually, but where are you going to start? And then as you see opportunity from the data, higher up. So I mean, my journey at Coursera was literally like find a domain, prove the data was useful in that domain, hire someone to do it, find a new domain, prove the data was useful in that domain, hire someone to do it. And then eventually when we had about a dozen data scientists, we moved towards what we there called the partnerships model, which is basically 3 people working in domain X, which was like the supply side with content partners, 3 people working in domain Y, which was monetization, and so on.
And so just to come back to the first part of your answer, which kind of getting the core tables set up properly, like if you were, just to make it really tactical for the audience, where would you start today? Like, I mean, even like particular products or ways of thinking about the problem.
Yeah, so I'd start with looking at who you work with and do they already have the core tables for you? So for example, if you work with Stripe, all of your revenue data, so who's buying what, for how much, when is like available directly from Stripe, right? So you can like pipe it into Snowflake, or you can access it directly in like our Sigma query interface. And depending on who you're working with on your marketing stack or other, like you may have a bunch of that out of the box self-serve. So don't build something that like you can just buy unless it's some core competitive advantage, which in most of these core tables cases it isn't. And then I would say just decide like what's your warehouse going to be? Yep. Get that warehouse. What's the most important entities? Again, users or products or whatever. Literally like take a G sheet, write out the schema that you need. I need these fields. I need them to have these standardized dimensions, and then go and build those pipelines. Is that too brute force?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, and then you'll have the data and people will be playing with it and you'll learn a lot, right? You'll learn what else you need. You'll learn what you thought you needed that you didn't. You should deprecate it because there's nothing worse than more fields than you need, which creates more confusion.
Yeah. And taking that a step further, what are like some common pitfalls like along this journey?
Yeah.
Well, what did you get wrong like multiple times over?
I mean, so going back to the Coursera days, we got ahead of our skis in, do you guys know Amplitude?
Yeah.
Yeah. We got ahead of our skis and being like, we just have to know everything. We have to understand every funnel and every page. And it's like, we didn't really. Like, we needed to understand the basics. Like, who are these users and what are they coming to us for? And what is this content that we have? And does that content meet their needs, yes or no? And if no, go out and source it. And if yes, get it in their hands. And then, like, you can move to the next layer of questions. But we didn't literally need to know, like, every page where people were clicking and scrolling, and we got over our skis. We spent more time and money than we needed there. The other pitfall, and this is a little bit different because I joined Coursera in 2014, and in 2014, like, data infrastructure and data tooling was in a very different phase. But I would say, like, we were too eager to build and didn't value our time sufficiently enough to go and buy. And in retrospect, that was a mistake. And I remember a simple example is our experimentation platform, right? So Andrew and Daphne are amazing. They hired a bunch of people from their labs. They hired me. I was straight out of grad school. Like, none of us had any industry experience, but we were, like, reasonably smart, like, reasonably hardworking people. And so we'd go just, like, build stuff. So we built an experimentation platform. Nice to have an experimentation platform, need to be able to experiment, like, not a core competitive advantage, and certainly not something that we needed to be spending 2 engineers worth of time on when we had a whole learning platform to go build. And you got to use your smarts here, and you got to play forward, like, where are you going to be in 10 years? And if your experimentation platform is going to be a core competitive advantage, if there's something about it that needs to be different for your business, then by all means go and build it. But I think people err on the side of believing we're special flowers. It's very unique, like, right? Especially once you have children, then you're like, my children are such special flowers. But just remember, there's a lot of great tools and infrastructure out there that you can buy off the shelf. And just to give you the counterexample, Stripe also has a homegrown experimentation platform. And in that case, it's the right decision because we're running hundreds of experiments a year that are on the charge path. So they're hitting like $1 trillion a year in payments. The decisions need to be made in near real time. We're talking in like tens of milliseconds. And we're processing your money or money of companies like Shopify or Amazon or Hertz. And so it does need to have like 5 nines of reliability. And you don't want to put anything on the charge path that you don't have that level of conviction in. And so it makes sense that our experimentation platform would be built internally. But I think in most cases, and unfortunately saw this a few too many times in our own lives at Coursera, like we biased too much to think we needed to do it ourselves.
And I guess just going on from that, I was thinking about a few of those tools. It sits comfortably within the growth team, and obviously you started at Stripe running data science, and then you came to run the growth team as well. I'd be curious as to kind of how that evolution happened. I mean, like, logically, it seems people who are running growth experiments in a product-led company need to be good at data, and like that seems logical, but it's not the setup that lots of companies have. And so I'm curious as to how
and I don't think there's anything precious for us or anywhere about growth sitting near science. Like, there's a lot of teams that need good science, but you can embed from anywhere. You can have good science and core payments without it necessarily sitting there. I think the genesis of the growth team was basically 2.5 years ago. We were looking at our organization and we were recognizing that we had moved from being payments infrastructure for the internet to financial services for the internet, from just having payments as our core product to having dozens of products, from invoicing to subscriptions to RevRecs to tax. And as we'd grown kind of all those verticals, each of those verticals had kind of spun up their own little growth team to grow their product, which makes a lot of natural sense. And we'd also gone very global. And as we'd gone very global, each country, or where not country, then region, had spun up its own little growth team as well. Makes a ton of sense. Different regions have different needs. But what we found is all those mini growth teams had 2 challenges. Challenge 1, they were interfacing with the same set of user. And so the user was often having a pretty inconsistent experience. You can think of it like, you're walking into the dashboard, but it's sort of like walking into a bazaar, and like a bunch of different products are talking to you, but they understand you a little bit differently, and they're telling you things that aren't fully consistent. And we thought, well, for the sake of the user, we want one user experience, we want one understanding of the user, and we want to put them through one optimal integration path. So that was the first reason for centralization. The second was just efficiency. Like, as companies grow up, you see that there's opportunity often in a lot of different verticals. But in the limit, when you step back and you actually ask, like, is that how we would optimally organize? You realize, actually, we just want a localization platform, not a bunch of custom localization pipelines per region. Actually, we want one shared infrastructure layer for sort of like understanding the acquisition channels and growth motions, not one for each of our different marketing channels. So I think that's really the genesis, which is some combination of what does the user need? They need this holistic, end-to-end, unified, consistent experience. And then what does Stripe need from an efficiency perspective? And we needed shared foundations. And that's not to say that we won't go back over time to having more vertical growth teams. I think they can be incredibly valuable. But at that point in our life cycle, I think we'd kind of gotten ahead of ourselves just through, I don't know, the laws of physics, natural growth, something. Yeah. I'm clearly not a physicist, although if you're hiring data scientists, physicists make the best data scientists.
From The Economist.
Yes, said The Economist.
You're pretty early to LLMs at Stripe. Would love to hear a bit more about how you're using LLMs, both for internal use cases and externally.
Yeah, so similar timing to growth, but maybe a little bit later. About 2 years ago, when LLMs broke through the zeitgeist, we kind of had this aha of like, there's so many interesting product applications and new solutions being spun up, and we understand intuitively how this will be useful for our users, but we're not quite sure how or where. And so rather than starting with a particular application that we ran at, we decided to run at democratization. And so what that looked like for us was I like to tell the story of 3 engineers in 3 weeks who spun up this tool called LLM Explorer. So you guys use like ChatGPT or similar, right? So it's a ChatGPT-like interface where any Stripe can engage with a bunch of different models in the backend. And to start out, we just had GPT 3.5, but like now there's over a dozen models there. And within 3 weeks of the release, so 6 weeks from the time we said we wanted to do it, we had a third of the company using LLM Explorer. And a third of the company, we don't even, that's engineers, that's marketers, that's salespeople. And then you start to look at what they're using it for and you realize there's some common patterns. And so we built this little feature almost overnight called presets, which is basically like make it really easy to share your prompt. And people built hundreds of these reusable interaction patterns that they could share across each other, right? So like a PM built one. Do you guys know the Optimized Checkout Suite? It's like one of our products. It was launching at the time. It was kind of complicated to explain. They built one that all marketers and sellers could use to understand how to pitch it to a particular customer, get referenceable other customers, understand, what are sort of the primary talking points of the features, what features are coming next that aren't yet available, on what time horizon, et cetera. So that's one example. So people from one function building it for another. But we also had lots of cases of people within function building it for each other. So for example, we have the Stripe Style Guide, which is the language we use to speak about our products and services externally. It's mostly from a combination of design and marketing, but even designers and marketers now run their content through the Stripe Style Guide to make it a little more stripey than it was when they started. So that was sort of the first foray into LLMs, which is let's just make it available to everybody and let's just have it be a simple ChatGPT-like interface. Very quickly, there was demand for more software-based approaches, and so we took that same backend and actually exposed it as an API internally at Stripe. So then engineers could hit the same API and access the whole same set of models with the same privacy and security controls and monitoring and cost attribution, which also became important because people get spendy. And they started to build both internally and external-facing programmatic applications. And so I think for the user-facing ones, there's a wide range, but kind of the 2 primary themes are information retrieval and writing code. And both of those are about making sure that non-technical folks at our users can do things they couldn't do before, and that technical folks can move faster. So you're in the dashboard and you have a question about Stripe or your integration with Stripe or your users on Stripe, you can ask it. You want to go and do that business intelligence stuff in Sigma. You no longer have to speak SQL. You can just use natural language to ask questions of your data, like how many users did I have this Black Friday versus last Black Friday? What countries are growing fastest year over year? Show me the top 10 customers who are from Russia, like whatever, you can use natural language. So that's sort of been our journey and evolution, but we very much, started internally, started very much like democratizing, made the community and sharing around it, and then started enabling the more programmatic applications, including the user-facing ones.
And then I guess with kind of the market moving as quickly as it is right now, like the infrastructure is evolving really quickly, and then I'm sure you're teams want to build like new user-facing applications or even new internal-facing applications really quickly? And how do you keep up with the kind of infrastructure evolution and also application evolution at the same time?
So our SLAs are, this is different than you're thinking for standard SLAs. When a new model comes online, we will make it available within a week internally. So new models will become available, build on our stack, new models will become available. But then the second is, yes, let all these flowers bloom, but just as with growth, then figure out what's the shared layer you need to build. So a simple example, you guys know RAG architecture? Yeah, like I'm getting half nods, half, maybe people are as tired as I am and not nodding yet, but basically, okay, so I like to okay, so like librarians, anyone still go to the library? Yes. Okay. So you don't walk into the library and walk up to a librarian, even a very seasoned librarian, and say, give me a book, right? You're like, I am going to winter in Sydney and I have a 14-hour flight and I need some like relaxed reading so I can fall asleep. Okay. And then they recommend the book. So RAG architecture just does the same. LLMs are trained on vast quantities of data. They're like a very, very intelligent librarian. But with RAG, you don't walk up to the librarian and ask them the question cold. You give them a bunch of context and color on you and then ask what they recommend. So you're basically like priming them with the most relevant context for you. Okay, so that's RAG architecture. So we had a bunch of applications of RAG architecture at Stripe, right? Tell the librarian, are you with me? You're laughing, I don't know. Okay, I can't tell if it's me or her. Okay, so tell the librarian, I love your smile. Tell the librarian to really focus on Stripe docs. Tell the librarian to really focus on the user's data, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found is we had a bunch of different assistant-like applications that were building their own RAG architecture. And so it was their own search infrastructure, and it was highly inefficient. And so then we stepped back and we said, okay, one RAG architecture to rule them all. You have different data sources, some public data sources, some private data sources. You can have different types of fine tuning on top, but it's this shared kind of horizontal.
Nice. And I'm like looking at the time and thinking I have to wrap up soon. So before I hand over to the audience for questions, this is your prompt to start thinking of questions, audience.
The guy in the front row right is ready for it.
One of the things we were talking about before we came on today was around how like the evolution of LLMs is enabling people to get started more easily building products. You can bootstrap yourself to the first version of something user-facing relatively quickly, start out as a wrapper, and then go forward. I'd love for you to like talk to that in a bit more depth. Obviously, there are a bunch of people in the audience who may be thinking about starting their own company soon, and obviously we want to encourage them to get started and come to us for money.
Go to her for money. She has very deep pockets.
And so yeah, would love kind of you to extend your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. So I think there's a lot of focus on the foundation models and the model providers for good reason, because the foundation models are the foundation of it all, and it makes sense that we need very high quality models and multiple different types of them. I think we have not yet reached the stage where the models that already exist today are being applied effectively across domains. And that's not about actually having hugely deep pockets and crazy GPUs and training your own foundation models. That's about maybe fine-tuning models, maybe not, maybe just being creative about the user need you're solving with some domain expertise that you have in healthcare or in law or whatever. And actually, I think Perplexity is a hilarious example of this, because I was talking to Arvind the other day, and you would think of like Perplexity as, first and foremost an AI company, but he is very open that he started his company purely as a wrapper, and it was a better user experience, and he was focused on the search interface, not the back end, and that he was just hitting an API. He wasn't training his own models, and now he has. But I think that's just such an interesting example, because Perplexity is a company that you think of first and foremost as like hardcore, deep LLM tech, and like that's not where he started, and he found great product market fit and a lot of revenue. Well before he peeled the next layer. And so I do think there's kind of a shortage of applications of existing models to domains. And even if you think that your application, like for your application, the current models aren't good enough, the models are getting so much better so quickly that it's still worth starting now. In the same way we have like LLM proxy, which is like the backend API where you can just like you just hit it and then you can like swap in different models depending on your requirements or as the models evolve and new ones come online. Like I'd encourage you to think about building your product the same way. What's the user need you're solving? Do you have access to some of those folks? What's the user experience that you're building? Go get that spun up. There's a data component in the back end. LLMs are a part of that. But like decouple the two a bit so that you can start to understand the user need and the product market fit even before the tech's fully there. And then just have faith that the models are advancing relatively quickly.
And I think that's one of the things that Australia and New Zealand are very good at, is kind of application software companies where people from specific domains who have a particular insight into a problem, like spin up software that makes them like uniquely suited to, like spins up software to solve that problem. And like, they were just the first person in the world to realize it and bring the best team together and grow. And they just happened to be based in Australia. We're great at that, whether it's Canva or Cloud Guru or GoOne. Tons of brilliant application software companies have come out of it. So we would love to speak to more people who are looking to do the same thing. Thank you very much. I will stop hogging the questions, and I would love to open up to the audience if anyone wants to get started.
So we spent a lot of time on your background at Stripe, Coursera, looking backwards. Love to know what you're most excited about over, let's say, the next 6 to 12 months.
That's an awesome question. So, foundation models are showing a lot of promise across industries, and payments is no exception. So the short story is we're training our own foundation models on Stripe payments data, and it turns out that those are super powerful at all sorts of problems that we're already solving today, like detecting card testing and mitigating fraud. But they also unlock whole new vectors of solutions that we can build for our users. So the sort of elevator pitch is like we can become an economic operating system for many of our users, built on payments data, but like far beyond the payment space itself. And there's all sorts of ways this could be productized, but like that assistant in dashboard can actually like proactively, doesn't yet, but it can proactively serve you business insights to like grow your revenue, or like you could hit an API to get the LTV of your customers. You could turn a bunch of important personalization decisions that you're currently making on autopilot with Stripe, so you don't have to have your data scientist doing it. So personalized discounts and recommendations and so on. So I'm just very excited about like looking at these millions of businesses, billions of transactions, trillions in payments volume. There's a ton of complexity in payments and refunds and disputes that we're already abstracting away for our users, but we can, including with foundation models trained on payments data, really go layers up and start to become more of an economic operating system. And one of the reasons I joined Stripe, and one of the reasons I'm obsessed with Stripe, is because we have the luxury of being able to operate really beneficently. Like anything we do to help our users' businesses grow also helps our business grow and helps the GDP of the economy grow. And so I just think those very aligned incentives mean we can do hardcore research and invest in things that's good for users without having to worry about monetizing it directly or having a whole go-to-market strategy. Like you just do good, and then Stripe's better off, and the economy's better too.
The other thing Stripe's very good at is kind of one-line phrases that describe what they do in very interesting ways, like increasing the GDP of the internet or building economic operating systems. So
I thought she was going to tease me for my run-on sentences. No one has ever called me concise.
Does anyone else have a question they want to jump in with? Great.
Hi, my name is KJ, and I have a startup in carbon emission reduction platforms and methodologies. So I'm just keen to know what Stripe is doing around a lot of this data coming through, and spend data is one of the big predictors of carbon emission related to products and services. Is there any thinking happening around educating customers around what they're buying and the carbon associated with it?
That's a great question, and that's actually not an idea we've run at before, which is informing customers of the carbon associated. We obviously do have our climate program, and our average user who contributes to climate contributes 1% of their revenues to buybacks, actually. So we have a very interested and informed group, but we should definitely look into whether we can feed those insights back to them so they understand the scope of their direct impact. That's a great call.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one, you mentioned mentioned before around the fact that you got everyone involved in the company of being able to query like Stripe's proprietary data. And so I work for an educational company. We create primary school lessons for students. And one of the things that we're struggling with in terms of building kind of like AI solutions on top is understanding, first of all, how much of our own proprietary data to give it. Not in the sense that we're worried about it, but in the sense of some of the data that we give it is more important than other data. And we're not sure whether or not we need to be making a judgment call on what data is more important than other data versus whether or not the LLMs themselves will learn over time which is most correlated to the outputs that you want to get.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, do we just give it everything and the LLM will figure it out no matter what kind of platform we're using? And then my second question is directly linked to what you mentioned before around how you had everyone internally using it first and whether or not you got to a point where you had to make a decision of, okay, we've got all these great solutions internally, but are they the right ones to explore further externally?
Yeah, okay. Those are fantastic questions. So for the first one, you didn't seem concerned about sort of like the data privacy piece, but just to say it because people tend to ask, definitely like don't throw the data in your consumer chat GPT, definitely have like an enterprise grade agreement. Okay, so assuming that's done, then for us, for double security, we actually strip PII when it gets sent out and then we rehydrate when it comes back. And so another reason to like build some of that shared infrastructure is you can build those sorts of security and privacy layers once and then it's applied across all the use cases instead of having to monitor each individual use case. In terms of like, will the LLM figure out the most important? I think it depends on the job you're asking it to solve. So I don't exactly know in your specific case, but LLMs and by the way, just like deep neural nets and a bunch of like related architectures are all very good with a lot of information and then identifying patterns from it. And in fact, like the more information you give it, like the better positioned it is. I think there is a component, including by the way in education, of like what is the data that I actually don't want to feed it because I have some inherent concerns about bias. So, for example, the analog in our state, we have a capital product. Unfortunately, it's not yet in Australia, but our capital product provides loans to businesses that run on Stripe, so that they have access to capital that they, by and large, wouldn't otherwise have because they generally don't have access to traditional loans. And there, it's very important that like no demographic data, for example, would be used in making loan decisions. And so similarly, if you're worried about, bias in teaching decisions or recommendations or whatever, I mean, like a simple one in Coursera, right? If we feed it the first name from which you can infer the gender, then it like won't recommend women as much STEM. So that's like not good. So, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's good. So you have to use your judgment there. But I wouldn't worry about the model's inability to understand the data. I would more worry about like what's your level of comfort with sharing the data and with that data being used for the decision at hand. To your second question, democratization was super powerful for us, but we did find that everybody's favorite thing to do with LLMs is make their own lives better. And, some great companies have started this way, going back to Perplexity. Like Aravind will tell you, like he just wanted citations because he's a nerdy academic. And so like, he wanted to be able to answer his own questions. And so he got this great tool. But I think we did see a bias towards internal productivity. And that's great. Stripe has 8,000 employees. And if you can make many of those employees more productive, that's good for the business. But we found that we needed to do a little more sort of outside in reflection of where the product needed to evolve with LLMs to meet user needs. And that was hard for any one individual to do themselves. And so there we use sort of more traditional product development cycles and user research and really deeply understanding like what challenges might be solvable with LLMs that our users were today facing in the product, which led to a lot of this sort of information retrieval and writing code for them and that kind of thing. Yeah. But people do love to solve their own problems, which is great.
It's like today's version of the to-do list app.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Anyone else? One last question in the audience?
A lot of interesting companies and startups. Are you noticing any kind of key trends
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we see, we've worked with, multiple generations now of founders. Stripe's been around over a decade, whether that was like SaaS platforms and marketplaces or cloud infrastructure, and like the current wave is for sure AI. And there are some differences in how those AI companies are forming and going to market. So first, we're seeing AI companies monetize much earlier in their journey than prior waves of startups. And I think some of that could be like compute costs are high for many of them, and so they do actually need to monetize. Some of it could be because LLMs have come a long way. You can actually like get a product to market without the full tech build, which means you're able to monetize earlier in your life cycle. The second, and I think this is the second one, is just mostly a function of like the pace at which the market is evolving, but we're seeing very rapid iteration on monetization models. So like, is it a fixed fee subscription? Is it usage-based billing? Like, what's my mechanism for charging customers? And we see this both in consumer and in enterprise. So like lots of iterations across the monetization model. And then the third is like, it's just very, very lean teams. Like we're talking 5 or 10 or 15 person startups that are managing very large businesses from a revenue perspective. And so this wave of startups for us is really outpacing other cohorts in their adoption of products like tax or revenue recognition or reporting. And then the last one I'll note is the AI startups are going global really fast, faster than their predecessors. And I think some of that could be that they're selling goods and services that are really borderless. Like, I don't know if you guys use like Suno to like make music or, right? That's sort of music or art, it's all very boundaryless. And then LLMs are also very good at translation. And so even if you have a product that needs to be localized, it's not very hard to localize anymore. And so we're seeing a lot of these AI startups monetize faster, iterate across monetization models, have to scale with like very lean teams, and so need a lot of the back office work done for them, and then go global like much faster than the prior waves. Does that resonate for anyone here? Yeah, some nods.
Thank you. I want to steal one last question at the end. Obviously, you talked a bit at the beginning about like your test with the plays and kind of seeing how like plays written by women weren't as likely to get signed. That's probably the wrong word. Produced. Yes. I can imagine as an economist now sitting on like probably one of the biggest economic data sets in the world, like you must want to run some experiments. Like, is there anything you like wish you could do?
Yes, we do run experiments. So capital actually is an interesting one. So we have folks who qualify for loans, and then we actually randomized who did we offer the loans to versus not, and we tracked those businesses over 18 months, and we looked at how their revenue grew, and we validated that like access to capital, including from you, has a tremendous ability to inflect growth, especially for these startups and SMBs. And that was really interesting for us because, again, to the point, like we can just operate beneficently. It's like, well, our capital product, like just on account, like we don't even have to really monetize it. Just on account of growing users' businesses is a good thing to be putting out there. So we do run those kinds of experiments. And I think as we move to the world more of economic operating system, either simulating for your business, like not, your business doesn't have to run its own A/B test. We can simulate for your business. How does a different monetization model or a different pricing scheme or a different back-end payments integration or a different threshold between sort of conversion and fraud serve your overall profitability as a function of your margins? So we do experiment, and I'm excited for more.
Great. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming here. I know it's a really hectic schedule, and like good luck to everybody for Thursday. I know it's a big event. I will do a little bit now of the housekeeping I was meant to do at the beginning.
Please silence your cell phones.
There is a cloakroom in the green meeting room on the left. It's the first one. On the right, there is a bathroom. There are drinks right over here and food. And please stay. We're open for certainly a few more hours. So please come and enjoy. Emily's going to be around for a little bit. So yeah, thank you everybody for your time.